Privilege, a word we have all seen in plenty of different contexts in the past decade. We have heard many complaints about many different forms of privilege, from white male privilege to more recently pretty people privilege. But what exactly is privilege? Can you really have more opportunities than someone else just because of your skin color, gender, or level of perceived attractiveness? How can we quantify this concept? First, let's see if we can find any statistical backing for disparities in socioeconomic status across race and ethnicity. From the United States Census Bureau, it is clear that white men are of better financial and social standing than those of other races or genders, with the exception of Asian Americans. In a survey of over 20,000 households, those with unmarried female breadwinners had an average income of $48,698, which is about $20,000 less than the average income of households with unmarried men. In the same survey, it was found that the average income for a white, non-Hispanic household owner was $77,000, whereas for a Hispanic owner, it was $56,000, and for a Black owner, $46,000. Several data tables across many years can confirm the same trends. So we see that race and gender do have an impact on financial status, but how do they affect health? According to Lincoln Fullon, in order for a social factor to be a determinant of health, it needs to meet 4 criteria. The social factor in question needs to influence multiple diseases, lead to multiple pathways of risk, be repeated over time, and affect access to resources that prevent disease. The American Academy of Family Physicians states that poverty does not cause disease, but it does increase the likelihood of risk factors for diseases and the ability to manage them. This means that Americans living in poverty are more likely to have diseases and less able to manage them. Living conditions associated with poverty can influence diseases like tuberculosis or respiratory infections like pneumonia. In the case of tuberculosis, there is a very linear trend between it and wealth, showing that the wealthier people are, the less prevalent the disease. There are multiple ways in which poverty increases risk of disease. Impoverished Americans are forced to live in poor conditions such as overcrowded cities, places with no heat or electricity, and with limited access to clean air, food, or water. All of these factors make these living conditions a breeding ground for disease, and the overcrowded areas allow these diseases to spread rapidly. When you live in places like that, everything can be a risk factor, from the air you breathe to the water quality in your home. To claim any trend between social factors and health, you need to have lots of supporting data that shows this is not just an outlier, but a long-standing relationship. We have claimed that poor living conditions lead to disease, but let's see if we can prove it. Here is a map of areas with poor water quality in America. And here is a map of poverty density. See the similarities? Here is a map of smog pollution, and here is the poverty map again. There are some differences on these maps. For instance, the water quality map shows that the Midwest struggles a lot with this issue. However, they don't seem to struggle with smog. But one thing is consistent with all of these. When there is a higher density on any map showing conditions related to disease risk, the poverty map is dense there as well. This shows that the relationship between poverty and poor living conditions is not just consistent in one state or area, but across all of America. The final criteria is that the social condition affects access to resources that prevent disease. This one is a little more straightforward. If you are living in poverty, you likely are either on Medicaid or do not have insurance. This limits your options to a free clinic, or more commonly, avoiding seeking medical help at all. Free clinics are a step in the right direction, but they often accrue very long lines, leading to an overwhelmed staff. The bigger problem here is that impoverished people don't tend to seek medical care until their symptoms become severe. This is due to a fear of large medical bills and a distrust of medicine. So, living in poverty and therefore having lower socioeconomic status is a fundamental determinant of health according to Lincoln Fullon. But how does this relate to our overall topic of privilege? In the beginning of this video, we showed that white males have better social and economic standing in America. This higher income allows them to not live in the impoverished areas with the risks we discussed. But there are definitely some exceptions to this. For instance, the poor people of Appalachia are white by a vast majority. The key here is that they are not poor because of their whiteness or because of their sex. This is a case of correlation without causation. It has been shown in many studies that Hispanic or Black Americans are given less opportunities because of their ethnicity, and the same goes for women because of their sex. To dive into how this happens and the social hierarchy at play goes beyond the scope of this already long video. For now, it is sufficient to show this privilege through statistics and data analysis. So what can the underprivileged do to break the cycle? You may have caught it in the bar graph a few moments ago, but let's look at this again. More than half of the time, Black Americans who are born poor stay poor, and the same cannot be said for poor white Americans who are able to increase their class 77% of the time. Are poor minorities just not doing anything to help their case? Or do the structures they are born into overwhelm their ability to change anything? The way I look at this issue may be unique to our class criteria. As a physics major who spends way too much time looking into theoretical physics, I would like to take a different approach. Don't worry, I will still discuss agency and structure. Everything in our world follows a Zipfian distribution. From the words in every book ever written to the radioactive states of elements, somehow any data table analyzed will follow Zipfian law. This basically means that the second most occurring variable occurs half as much as the most common occurring, the third a third as much, and so on. This is because everything in nature, from electrons to human actions, tend to follow a path of least resistance. This creates a snowball effect, where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, the polarized become more polarized, etc. By nature itself, the easiest path for a poor minority is to stay poor. Now, physics aside, let's see why this happens. Even if a poor minority tried to break from these trends, what agency would they have? The path of success in America is often preached as doing well in school, going to college, getting a job out of college, etc. This American dream is much more accessible to some people than it is to others. To get into college, you need to have good grades in high school. To get good grades in high school, you need to have the resources to do so. If you have no money for books, tutors, laptops, or calculators, you are already at a disadvantage. If you have to babysit or take on a job during after-school hours, you are at a time disadvantage. Even if none of these factors are present, did your school offer AP classes? Did you get a tutor for the SATs? Even if you beat the overwhelming odds and graduate college, your name may be what holds you back. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, job applicants with white names needed to send about 10 resumes to get one callback. Those with African American names needed to send around 15 resumes to get one callback. You see where I'm going with this. Poor minorities' agency is overwhelmed by structure. Medicalization is the process by which previously non-medical issues become classified as medical. This can be very important for some, as health insurance will not cover non-medical issues. There are many of us who cannot afford the resources to fix a problem unless it is considered a medical issue. This theory relates to the topic of agency as well. If a health problem is considered something a person is causing themselves and can reasonably stop themselves, it will be hard to convince anyone to medicalize it. For example, some may view drug addiction as a self-caused issue that a person should reasonably be able to cure themselves of, whereas some see this as a structural issue that a person needs professional help to recover from. Debates around medicalization typically center on the topic of agency versus structure. This all, of course, relates back to privilege as well. There are significantly more Black people incarcerated on drug charges than any other race, and yet, only when opioid problems started to increase in white neighborhoods, Congress decided to make some changes by creating the Drug Addiction Treatment Act. This lifted a ban that prevented treating opioid addiction properly, which makes you ask yourself, why was there a ban in the first place? Even worse, the drugs doctors are now allowed to prescribe to treat opioid addictions only accept commercial health insurance or cash, so it is only available to a more affluent population. In a way, the strategic decisions of to or not to medicalize an issue can be used as a form of population control, and in the case of opioid addiction, I believe that is the exact intention. Epidemiologists study health conditions or diseases and seek to find patterns in them. Social epidemiology furthers this research into social conditions, specifically as they relate to health. This is strictly empirical research, and it is up to the observer to determine causes and effects of data. Throughout this video, I have been contextualizing empirical research in order to prove several points. But, as I touched on before with the Appalachian population, trends in data do not always represent a cause-effect relationship. In that case, a large population of poor whites did not mean that they were poor because they were white. Language is important here. Another instance in this video was looking at the maps of poverty compared to maps of risk circumstances. If you are familiar with America, you know very well why the water pollution was so dense in the Midwest, and yet air pollution wasn't. The outside context is very necessary to understand data. I hope with this video I was able to sufficiently quantify privilege as it relates to these 4 theories. While I did not go into how race and gender can lead to privilege as much as I would have liked, I was able to show that they do through data analysis. That concludes this video. The script I made and important resources are included in the description below. Thank you for a great semester.